Has your buyer ever put you off saying, let me get back to you? If you've ever heard this dreaded statement, whether it be on the phone, maybe you've even received it in an email, then I've got the solution for you. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how you avoid reaching the point at which your buyer says, let me get back to you. And if you do actually get there, what you can do to move past it and close the sale. By the way, make sure you watch this entire video because there's a little bit of a bonus I've included at the end. Hi, I'm Shawn Casemore, and I help you become a high-performing, in fact, one of the highest-performing sales professionals out there, allowing you to make more money in less time. If that sounds good to you, make sure you hit the like button on this video, subscribe so that you can stay up to date on all my future videos when I release them, which is typically every single week. You know, we've all been there. We've been speaking with a buyer, maybe it's on the phone, maybe it's on Zoom, maybe it's face-to-face in their office, and they say those dreaded words, let me get back to you. Oh, let me get back to you. It reminds me of dating when I was young. I'd call a girl up and I'd say, hey, do you want to go out? She'd say, let me get back to you. You know what that means? They're not getting back to you. Now, there is the odd chance your buyer, coming back to reality here, your buyer will get back to you. But we've all heard that statement. And it comes at different times, doesn't it? Sometimes it comes when you initially reach out, you start talking with your buyer about your product or your service, and they say, yeah, let me get back to you. Sometimes it comes after you've issued the proposal and you try to book a follow-up and they say, yeah, let me get back to you. So it can come at many different times throughout the buying process. But here's the key. That statement, it doesn't really mean that what you've offered isn't important to them, and it often doesn't mean that they're actually going to get back to either, unfortunately. What it does mean is that what you've proposed, your product, your service, your solution, whatever it is just not a priority for the buyer. So maybe it will be at some point in the future, but it isn't right now. So we really have to focus on that point if we want to avoid the statement. We have to make sure that what we're offering, what we're selling, again, product, service, solution, or otherwise, is a priority. So let me walk you through exactly how to do that. All right, so the buyer has shared with us their priorities. Great, we have that in hand. So going back to my earlier example, if we're selling widgets, and let's change this up a little bit because you might not be selling widgets, right? Let's say you're selling insurance, right? Or you're selling finance or whatever you're selling, they share with you, well, it's, my priority is to save money. My priority is to get better coverage. My priority is whatever, okay? But now that you have this information, you can use it in your presentation. You can use it in your pitch. I hate to say that word, but some people use it, right? So you can use that to your advantage because now you know if they say to you, widgets are not a priority at all. We don't use them at all, never will, never have. Thanks for calling, right? I'll get back to you. So if that happens, okay, we've saved ourselves a lot of time. We haven't gone through a whole presentation to find out later, yes, not important to us. And if they actually use our product or our service, whatever it is we're selling, now we know what is a priority when it comes to our product or service, right? So we can use that. So how do we use that? Well, what we do then is throughout the conversation, once we've asked that question, we get some sort of an answer. And if you have to dig a little bit, that's okay, right? If you have to ask, so tell me more about, right? So if they give you a very vague priority, you say, tell me more about that. Or how will that apply? Or when do you expect to achieve that? But once we have those tidbits, that gold, if you will, from our buyer, now we can set ourselves up to use that in our presentation by saying things such as, you mentioned earlier one of your priorities was, you said earlier this was a priority to you. I know you said, and let's be more explicit here, I know you said cost was a priority. This will reduce your costs by Q2 of this year, right? So there's an example. So when we ask priorities early on in the conversation, in the presentation, and by the way, it's okay to ask them in both. If I ask you on the phone what your priorities are, then we go to a presentation, I might say, in our earlier discussion, you mentioned your priorities are A, B, and C. Are those still the case? And if they say, yes, they are, and you need more info, you say, well, let me ask you, when it comes to priority A, what about, and then throughout your presentation, you refer back to, you mentioned this was a priority. In our earlier discussion, you said this was a priority. So do you see what we're doing here? We're flushing out the fact that this is a priority for the buyer. And indirectly, by continuing to refer back to their priorities that they shared with us, we're reinforcing in their mind that, yeah, this must be a priority because Shawn keeps saying it's a priority, and I did tell him those are my priorities. So actually helping ourselves here to keep this moving forward and to avoid that objection that we talked about earlier. All right, if you're enjoying these tips, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you like the video and comment below what strategies, what language are you using to avoid this dreaded objection. Okay, so if you're doing this, we're reinforcing priorities, let's shift a bit. Okay, so we've talked a lot about reinforcing priorities, bridging the gap between the buyer's priorities and our product or service. But here's the thing. We still want to make sure we avoid that objection of let me get back to you. The way to do that then, and step 4 in this process, is really to say, as you're talking to the buyer, we want to stop and check in, okay? So I suggest you do that in any sales conversation. Too many sales professionals I know kind of blast through the presentation and never give the buyer a chance to breathe or speak. So we always want to be checking in, saying things like, does that make sense to you? Does that work for you? But as we're moving forward in the conversation, and we want to do these check-ins to make sure that we're hitting the mark when it comes to priorities. So let's build on that last comment I mentioned a second ago. When I used the example of, hey, in step 3, this is, our policy will allow you every quarter to go in and change your fees, which will allow you to save money, which is a priority for you. Okay, so we left off there. Step 4 is then I add my check-in point. And the check-in point goes like this. So I finish that statement, and then I stop and and if the buyer says nothing, or it takes a moment, I say, would that work for you? Could you make that work within your organization? Would that actually save you money? Now here's why. Because I might think this is of value to the buyer. I might think this is going to help achieve their priority. But maybe it won't. Maybe the buyer doesn't have somebody who can manage their insurance policy, and hence they'd say, look, I don't have anybody that can use that, so that's not going to save me money. I won't know, therefore, if the priority that I'm trying to solve will work for the buyer unless I stop and check in with them. The check-in language I suggest is using, again, comments such as, does that make sense? Or will that work for you? Or could you see yourself doing that? And notice I'm trying to now paint a picture of them using my product or service, which will move us into the next step. All right, so I'm not going to repeat everything we've gone through, but here we are. Conversation is finished. We've confirmed the priorities. We've tied together, bridged together our product or service with their priorities. We've checked in to make sure that they could use this, that in fact this does help solve or serve their priorities. The last step is to convert. Right now we want to move to that quote or that proposal that we're going to put together. Here's the kicker. A lot of sales professionals rush to that point. If this conversation has gone well, you think, great, I know the priorities. I'm going to write or structure my quote or proposal to capture those, which, by the way, I'll talk about in a minute. There's a problem here, okay? And the problem is this. We are not yet 100% sure the buyer is ready to move to that stage. So the 5th step you want to take is to ask the buyer something like, would it make sense based on our conversation then to put this into a proposal or quote, however you do it, so that you can review? So I ask if they'd like a quote or proposal. I don't assume, I don't tell them that's the next step, I ask. Now you might say, well, gee, Shawn, that's not assertive enough. I don't want to ask. What if they say no? Well, if they say no, it's a sign you're not there yet. There's something missing. And if we would have gone ahead and sent one in, they probably would have said to us, what? I'll get back to you. So we're trying to flush that out. So the way to do that is to ask, are you ready then? Would it make sense that I put this information into a proposal or into a quote for you to have a look at, okay? Now, if they say no, there's an objection we have to deal with, and you likely would have got the, let me get back to you. And you have to ask, is there a gap then? If they say, no, I'm not ready for that, say, okay, understand, is there a gap or something maybe I didn't address? And then again, and see what they have to say. But what we're really doing is setting ourselves up here to make sure that this thing moves forward. So I'm going to assume at this point they say, yes, please do. And we're going to move on to a couple quick bonuses here, just a second. All right, now if you want to be successful in sales, I'm interrupting this program to say this. I've put together what I call a 30-day sales action planner. It's a tool, very simple to use. You can download it, you can carry it with you. It's digital, but it's really to help you stay on track with your sales targets and sales goals. If you'd like your own copy, there's no obligation at all. There's a link below. Just click it and you can get that copy sent right off to you. All right? Okay, let's get on to it. All right, here is a bonus for you. So building on the last point I made, we asked the buyer, would it make sense to move this into our quote or proposal, right? You want to make sure, even if there's a quote, and I've been in companies where the quote is kind of digitally or automatically created and there's fields and you can't really change anything. That's horrible, because we want to make sure when we do that quote, it at least mentions some of these priorities. It refers to all this conversation, right? If you attach the quote and put that into your email, okay, that's fine. But oftentimes they'll print the quote and show the quote to other people, which doesn't contain all the dialogue. So my bias is you want to make sure some of the priorities the buyer mentioned and so the comments you made about how your product or service supports or achieves or satisfies those priorities is noted somewhere on the quote or proposal. So if there's a comment box, you can note this, or heck, if you have to, just write it on there. But just say, something like, based on your priorities, the solution above will best meet those priorities or best achieve your priorities. Or you can be more explicit, right? Based on our discussion, option number 3 above is the option I would suggest to make sure we save you money by Q2. So you can be as broad or as specific as you want, but the key is you've got to make a note like that on that quote or proposal so that it ties in all this discussion we've had with what the buyer's now looking at. Because remember, a lot of times they will forward that, or even worse, print it off, and if it's not something on the quote, other people, all they look at is what? Price. And then what do they say? Let me get back to you. So make sure you apply that bonus tip. Till next time, get out there and let's go sell something, shall we?